Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I'm delighted to introduce our next speaker. Sharon Padgett describes herself as a visually impaired, poor, fat, feminist, queer, leather femdom. Sharon speaks at conferences on a variety of topics. When speaking on disability, BDSM, feminism, or atheism, she integrates the concepts of human rights and intersectionality. The title of Sharon's talk today is Purity Culture is Just Ableist, the Reasons Why Purity Culture Ignores Disabled Women. Sharon, I'm so glad you can talk to us about this important topic today. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for allowing me to be a part of this incredible conference. I've been really checking and in on a lot of the presentations, and they've been simply amazing. So yes, that introduction pretty much sums it up. And let's see, I'm going to figure out how to, I moved to the next topic. I will be having my glasses off and on because, yes, I'm visually impaired. So I want to really give an introduction of me and my standpoint as far as this conference, as far as this particular talk. And because it informs how I go about dissecting the information that I have learned. Yes, I'm visually impaired. I'm legally blind. I went to school when I was little, from from kindergarten through the third or fourth grade in a school for the blind. And it was, we lived on campus and we were basically shielded from the public. Whenever there were events that we participated in, they shut down whatever events that we went to, so we can have the whole space. So we rarely interacted with able-bodied people. And some of us went there from like kindergarten through 12th grade. So we kind of had some arrested development going on there. The only times we really got out into public space was through dealing with going to like revivals and stuff like that. And it was late at night as well. So, that was kind of the problem. And, and we used to have to stand up and be like, oh, look at the disabled folks. Look at the little children. Aren't they sweet? Aren't they like godlike? Aren't they like little angels? So, this really kind of hits with me in a way. I am a BIPOC person. I'm a person of color with albinism. And so my views are kind of skewed a little way is that. Albinism is I don't have enough melanin in my skin. And I'm queer. And I use queer specifically because I love queer. And I am politically, I have no problems with saying I am lesbian or bisexual. But I am queer because I also am in the leather community, and I'm also a kinkster. In particular, I am a femdom, and I don't like the term femdom, and I actually do a workshop on why I don't like the term femdom. The shorthand is that it's mainly a male gaze, and I consider myself a lifestyle dominant, meaning that it's about me and not you. So as like male submissives, and I do enjoy male submissives. And so that's why I call myself queer in particular, is because men are really groovy. However, I only want to deal with men in intimate sexual relationships if I am the dominant. So I say I'm queer. And leather is more of a culture thing. It's what do you do with the culture. You honor the history of leather and realizing that it was started by gay men way back, and it was an act of survival, an act of how to recognize each other, how to actually get your needs met in a time where you could at the least lose your job, at the most lose your life. And so there was a culture that surrounded leather that has since moved, expanded to more than just gay male culture, but it also expanded to lesbians, biker culture. It was also embedded into it. And a lot of heterosexual folks practice leather as well. So that's who I am. My standpoint is the tools basically that I use or that inform my ways of thinking when I'm doing this particular type of research here, but in my political life, how I move about the world, how I dissect information, and how I, as a guiding post, as a feminist, I like to say I was born a feminist. It just kind of felt like I was always there. And my study is gender studies and political science, but I have been doing human rights work for over 30 years. I've had the absolute pleasure of studying under Loretta Ross, who won a MacArthur grant recently. Yay, like, it's just amazing. So she started the Human Rights at Atlanta, which is where I do most of my political work. And I was a part of that first class, which was it was a weekend of literally 10 hours a day of study. And it's one of my favorite classes, and I'm so proud of getting certificates in that. And then as an atheist, also informs how I look through Christian and religious work. I always felt that I was an atheist. I've never had grown up within a church. My only experience was going to this school for the blind that, we prayed when we got up, we prayed when we had dinner, we prayed when we had lunch, all meals. Then we had devotional services before we went to bed. And it was always something that got me into trouble because I would just be laughing and just be like, what is this all about? And just kind of like, what? And I would always get in trouble. So that's kind of me in a nutshell, and how this, how I went about this project. So let me define some terms real quick before we get into it. And I really wanted to get people to understand the word ableism, and it's the discrimination and of social prejudice against people with disabilities. It's right here on the screen. What I really wanted to point out in this particular definition, which came from Ableism 101, is the assumption that disabled people require fixing and defines people by their disability. And it's the word fixing that really interests me in terms of in relation to purity culture, because there is this kind of underlying fixing of problems, in particular in one particular book that I had the pleasure of listening to, a YouTuber named Ex Fundy Diaries. Her name is Ellie. Their name is Ellie. Her name is Ellie. And she read this book called, let me see. I forgot it. Let me grab it. The book is a book about frontier period culture, and this guy finds his the woman he thinks he's going to marry, and he all through the thing he's trying to fix her, and she is a prostitute, and he is like, he sees her as broken, and he's trying to fix her, yes. And so that fixing is what sort of stands out to me, and it gets me actually into the next word, queering. And queering, the thing I learned about this word, I've always loved queer in the academic sense, but I didn't know that the term queering was used before it actually became an academic word, and it denotes like queering, making it strange is what they say, but I love the trouble. So queering is basically troubling a discourse, and so I'm using queering in a way of troubling purity culture about its ableism. And then I wanted to bring up a word that's familiar within the disability culture, and that is crypt. Originally, I do believe it was started by Leroy Moore, who is now getting his PhD, his doctorate in California, at a school in California. And he is mostly connected to Black disabled activism. And he is also very rooted in hip hop culture. And so he is constantly calling the hip hop culture on its ableism. But through times, this word crypt became really enduring for people with disability who live in radical disability and do progressive disability work. So in a way, it can be interchanged with query. And so I'm basically cripping purity culture. And what that means is that I'm troubling it. I'm looking for where the disability lies within this culture. And if it isn't, then that's a problem. And it's a problem really because it's the impoverished nature of purity culture. And what I mean by that is we don't hear anything about disability and the disabled body as it relates to purity culture. I had the hardest time finding resources, finding conversation and discourse as it relates to disability and purity culture. It was almost impossible. And so at a point I was like, well then it's very hard to do this. Maybe I shouldn't do it. But again, my feminism, my queerness, my cripness said to me, this is a problem that needs to be talked about, because disabled people are everywhere. Surely disabled youth are everywhere. We deal with the same problems that other people have, and we just have the disability. And of course, the fact is that one thing about disability culture is that we are continuously, constantly fighting to be looked at as whole. And one of the ways that we fight to be looked at as whole is sexually. And we're not looked at as sexually. We're not even looked at as marriageable. And if we are, it's like, especially women, who's going to take care of you? You're married, you need to find somebody to marry to simply take care of you. And then there's also the sense of we're constantly remaining childlike. And so as I was trying to find the research, I started thinking like, what's going on here? I know we are there, but how are we there? So I did have to use the many different isms. And what I mean by that is I had to look at where does homophobia lie, where does heterosexism lie, where does racism lie, where does ageism lie, where does classism lie within purity culture, and to suss it out from there. And the reason why I looked at it in that way is, generally speaking, the when one express homophobia, or one express racism, or even classism, the chances are they have some negative ideas about other marginalized or oppressed groups. So it's not such a jump to sort of find or pull out or assume that there's some ableism. And in this particular instance, the ableism is represented by the fact that there's absolutely no conversation on it. It's like, are disabled people worthy of being in the conversation, whether it's good or bad? That's the question. So the act of just actually not even acknowledging that there are people with disabilities that are in this culture is an ableist act. And one way is, again, at how this happens, may show itself is through the fantasies that purity culture basically invent. And, we all have our fantasies. And I'm talking purity culture in of itself, not individuals and their fantasies. I'm talking about how purity culture, through its saying that, if you keep yourself pure, the notion of purity, the notion of being godly bodies, of being your body being a temple of God, and the notion that that virginity is pure, the notion that purity, although sometimes they don't outright say it, purity is white culture. The notion that purity is being able to walk on two legs. Purity is having the perfect body, and the perfect body is the European standard, the able-bodied European standard. And so they're not going to have fantasies where it involves disabled people. And so this is another way in which disabled people are left out and not seen as sexual beings. And also the frustration of not being able to do the things that or not even being able to have the conversation about your frustration, because disabled young folks also have, some of us also have hormones that rage because we're human. And so not even being thought of as a sexual being from the get-go, your frustrations are not looked at, our frustrations are not looked at as well. So in my doing this work, in my doing this research, this really interesting thing happened. I was on a Zoom, and I was teaching a class on, or doing a Zoom presentation on BDSM in the blind culture. And I came across a friend of mine that I will call Rita, not her real name. I came across this young woman, this woman that I knew at Governor Moorhead School. And she was my partner in going to school. We had to hold hands as we walked to the school building. And I viewed her as this I viewed her as this goody goody. I will have to tell you that when I got to Golden Moorhead School, I'm telling you, I was going to disrupt everything. And so we had to be in school on time. She was really into that. Let's be in school on time and all of this. And she was the perfect angelic in the house parents' eyes of the perfect, blind, beautiful angel white girl. And it's just that she couldn't see, but she constantly, we all noticed the preferential treatment that she had. And so she was a day student. She didn't really live with us. She stayed at with her parents, but she would come in the morning and she would go to the campus the cottage that we lived in that was her age, and she would walk to school with us. And so she would always be in this good mood, and I'd be like, why are you all in a good mood? And I would want to be all slow down the whole process. Let's go over here. I was the devil on her shoulders, for the lack of a better word. If we got older, I tell you, I would have, who knows where I would have led this young woman. So I was surprised to see her on this particular Zoom meeting talking about BDSM and kink. And so I said, hey, you remember me? And we started talking. And I started like reminding her how we were. She says, that part of life was so difficult for me because I did come from incredibly religious parents who, from what she remembers, she felt that her sister, who was a little bit older, maybe getting into young teenager, she felt that her sister, that they were always saying things to her like, you're going to be a perfect wife. You're going to, the stuff that they're saying within purity culture. You're going to be perfect. You save yourself and you're going to have a perfect husband and God's going to bless you with beautiful children. And they never said anything like that to her. She never heard the words perfect. She never heard the words. She heard that she was beautiful if she wasn't blind. She would hear that a lot. And so I said, oh man, I'm doing this talk, and I would love to get some snippets from you and share like an interview or something like that. And so she never really had to deal with this kind of thing. The words to her was like, what? Shameless and sexuality, what? And so, but as we talked over the months, just letting her kind of lead and me just kind of putting up questions, going a little easy, because as we continued to talk, she became more agitated, more upset. And it wasn't so much at me, and it wasn't so much as with the questions. It was that she realized this is where she was. And this was the first time that she had a chance to actually dissect that. And it became quite traumatic. And so I stepped back and she, I was like, you don't have to do this. I love that we have established communication. I love that we are talking. I love that you are exploring new ways of sexuality for you. That's beautiful. But you do not have to do this. And so she pulled out. And I told her that's totally fine. And so sharing the stories, I won't go into detail. She did tell me some things, but I can't go into detail because she is still dealing with it. And I want to honor and I want to respect her. And I also feel a bit of ways about being the one to bring this up to her in such a way that if I really and I need to work on some things. If I knew that it would impact her this way, one, I probably wouldn't have done it, but I would have done it face to face where we could have had more of a deeper sort of connection. I gave her some friends in disability movement that have had similar experiences. Eli Clare talks about religious trauma for people with disabilities, and I happen to know him. I wasn't able to connect him with her per se, but I let her know about some of his writings. And so I left it at that. I did say, let's not lose communication. And so she allowed me to just tell that part of the story. So, but I think it's important because one, for me, it's personally important because I didn't have that sort of real-time connection to be able to see it. I see purity culture. I didn't grow up in it, but I was seeing it in terms of this theoretical structure. And by experiencing this alongside of her, I was able to really say, yes, this is really something that we as disabled people go through as well, and that we need to have this conversation. So that really did change it for me. And it brought up all of these questions like, yes, we as disabled people are everywhere. So how does, even if they don't speak about it, how do those who do purity culture, how do those parents, those religious leaders talk to the children, the young folks, the older folks, people who are disabled? How do they have this conversation with them? How do disabled people fit into the purity culture narrative? Do they fit? Do they, like they do a lot of LGBT or TBLG, as I like to say, putting trans first to center transness? How do you ignore that like like you ignore TBLG folks? You know, is there just like out of sight, out of mind kind of thing? And also, how does purity culture engage with disabled people, if they do, in retrospect to marriage? Is God also in the bedroom of that disabled couple? You know, what is that about? There's so many other questions to be put out there. And one reason why is because, again, disabled people have this, you know, they experience this. We are everywhere. And so by them not having a space to talk about it, it does set up this kind of shame, this kind of like isolation that leads to things that may not be safe, that leads to actions that, you know, that may not be healthy, that creates and disabled even more. It definitely brings on a mental sort of disability, sort of mental, emotional crisis, emotional not being well-being. I'm just getting like flustered here, but it does bring up this kind of isolation where it can bring on some mental health issues. And then of course, knowledge being power. How do you get this power as a disabled person to make your own decisions about anything? Even if you wanted to, even if you believed in this purity culture, if you are disabled, you're not being able to participate in it and make your decision to even come out on the other side if it's something you want to do or not do, because it's not talked about. So these are many, many questions that need to be asked. And so it does bring me to this conclusion that, disability is, like I've been saying, it is a natural part of human experience. There are disabled people everywhere. I know it may be hard for some folks to believe because, again, disability is not in the public discourse. And if it is in very harmful ways that are like wrapped up in religious myth of what disability is, how disabled people are. If you look at like the Bible, disabled people generally are seen as outsiders, and they're generally are seen as tools to get into heaven. I don't know if you've been around people with disabilities who oftentimes there are people that come up to us and say, well, let me pray for you. God didn't make them no mistakes. And what that means is that so you are maybe perfect in God's ways, but what that does is set up this sort of unrealistic view of disabled people. So, we're everywhere, but because we're not able to have these sort of discourses, because we are isolated, because we're not part of the conversation on these various sort of cultures, beliefs, it takes away our agency. It takes away our ability to make decisions on how we want to live our lives. And that definitely includes our sexual lives. And, it's just many disabled people say it's not the disability, it's not our physical disability sometimes that makes us disabled. It's people's ideas surrounding these disabilities. Because I tell you, we get training just like anybody else. I have these special tools to make me see a little better. And if listen, my glasses are broke. And when I have to go get some through special sort of low vision specialties and all of that. So we know how to take care of our disability. But what really stumps us sometimes, or what really puts us in a bad and unsafe and undeveloped place, is people's ideas about disability. And so that actually is what becomes disabling. So the purity culture, we know that purity culture has a impact on all of those who've experienced it, in that it takes away all of their sexual agency. And so, this is where you have the sort of mental trauma that happens with most people that go through this. That's why we have this sort of misunderstanding of sex and sexuality. That's why some of us don't enjoy sex, because of all of this stuff that was dumped on us. And I'm using us, and maybe I should define it again. I not grew up in this culture, but I feel a kind of a empathy in that it also applies to disabled people, and I've certainly had that experience. So it's real easy for me to say us, because it's the same kind of sort of feelings and experiences in that way, with an eye, of course, to intersectionality, that there's things that are certainly different for those who experience purity culture than those of us who were not but are disabled. There are some differences, but there are some similarities as well. But one of the good things that is happening within the just public discourse all around is that disability studies, academic-wise, is just growing. More people are entering into this discipline, which is fantastic. So what needs to happen is, even though we're not talking so much about purity culture in the public discourse anymore. One, it's definitely not going to go away. It may like be silent for a little bit and come back. But hopefully there'll be more people that will be interested in it in terms of doing disability studies and actually answer these questions. We may have the opportunity to actually hear the stories, the experiences, get the answers to the questions out there on how purity culture interacts with the disability culture. And of course, again, that's knowledge and is power, and we can only grow from this particular thing. I invite questions if there are any. Thank you again for inviting me to speak. It is an amazing conference. And so if you have any questions, I'm open to them. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this session. I really feel like it was eye-opening for me. It was really enlightening. You helped me to think about things in a way that I hadn't considered them before. So I really appreciate being able to watch your session. We have some comments that have come in. Someone says, human society has a serious case of arrested development itself. People have a very limited capacity for what equality could be.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. And yeah. And it seems like human society doesn't really care that there's arrested development. It's just like, and matter of fact, it's like we don't know how to deal with that, and we don't know how to recognize that there's arrested development because it looks different per the individual.
Right.
And then when you deny one group of people, or you deny people their sexual agency, their sexual agency through knowledge, right, through education, that further plunges us into this sort of arrested development. And so, and we see that going on now, absolutely. And it's just like we're headed to this, and it does impact more than just like our arrested development as it relates to sexuality. It impacts us, just our arrested development in terms of how we do empathy, how we just develop society as a whole. How can we develop society as a whole when we can't even develop ourselves in terms of building empathy? And developing and walking away from sexual shame. It all fits.
Yeah, someone else made a comment that just reminds me of that. All isms are just narcissism plus power and control dynamics. Adler, the famous psychologist, was right that humans are obsessed with power, hierarchy, and control. That sounds right.
Yeah, I'm actually going to, for this kink group, I'm actually going to be next month doing a workshop on power. And power is not a bad thing. Power has so many different aspects to it. It's like how you do power. And what do you do with that power?
Yes.
And so that's the thing. We're obsessed with power, but what kind of power are we obsessed as human beings with? And how damaging can that obsession be? Well, we know it can be very damaging. So I agree. That's a really great point. Thank you.
Somebody has said, disabled people sometimes cannot do religious, traditional, P in V, sex. So, of course, we need to have other kinds of positions and other kinds of forms of sex. So, purity culture and one way how to have sex is totally ableist. Hence, the social theory of disability, because differently abled people get barred access to things that they should otherwise do that they could otherwise do without social discrimination. That is exactly true.
Yeah, yeah. But the wonderful part of that, what I like to say about disabled folk, and it's so interesting that we also hear the word differently able. I was actually having a conversation with a lot of folks who are in and out of the disability culture and academic or culture wise about that word differently able and what does it mean? What does it actually mean? But the thing about disabled people and being denied access, and even like disabled people be having some P and V sex. I mean, you know, they be having it. And because I know I have conversations with them and they be having it. So, but the other thing about disabled people that I like to say is that we some brilliant people. And by that is we oftentimes have to recreate situations because of the barriers that were put up. One, maybe certainly by society, but also by our physical bodies. So, you know, that P and V sex may be some serious P and V, but it may not look like the P and V that some person that has P and V sex that's not disabled may not recognize. But it's involving that P and that V. So that's you know, we do have sex. A lot of people are excluded sometimes from sex, hence purity culture. But what I'm trying to say is that it's that disabled folks, we do this, but because we are not part of that dialogue, that people assume that we don't do this, then we sometimes are not privy to information that could really make our sex lives much better. And also interacting with other non-disabled people in sexual ways. Great point. Thank you.
Yes. It's a very heartfelt question that's come through. I have a very difficult time accepting my disability. Recently, I was turned down by a friend I'm in love with because she's very active and looking for a partner who shares her hobbies of hiking, climbing, extreme sports, etc. All things I loved before my body started failing. That, combined with the severe anxiety I have of approaching intimacy at all from being raised in purity culture, I've become very discouraged and afraid that I'll never be able to find love or even have sex. Do you think there's any hope for me now?
Absolutely. When I said that we are some brilliant people, we are, because we do invent. You know, I can guarantee you there are there are lots of ways to camp. There are lots of ways to climb mountains. I do know some disabled folks that climb mountains, and even physical. One of the things why we are brilliant is we invent the things that make our lives seamless. We invent the things that allow us to participate. It is amazing what happens. I would, one of the things that a lot of universities are doing is there's a sort of a technology part of a lot of universities that do figure out ways that someone with a disability who likes to do practically anything can do it. And that engineering mind of them starts ticking. And because one, there are always disabled people like, hey, why don't you try this? Why don't you do this? That inventions for disabled people grow. And so looking at ways, look at it in terms of what can I do to make my life be as full as it once was. And I understand the anxiety that comes with it. I understand that deep, deep fear, that real fear that you're not going to find love. Mm-hmm. But they say, once you work with your other passions, it pops up on you. I'm not one to say guarantee this will happen, but when you focus in on you and how to make your life better, people see that confidence that comes from that. People see that will, that passion, that interest, and it brings them right along.
Oh, that's so people, encouraging.
You know?
Yes. Yeah. Right on. Sharon, we're out of time, but I want to thank you again for joining us, because I do feel this is a very important topic.